What is going on, guys? It's Fishbosh, and today we're going to be talking about another Devastator build. And guess what? It is not a melee build. Make sure you guys use the timestamps if you don't want to hear my beautiful intro. But seriously though, if you do have different components to this build, I have utilized timestamps. That way, if you have certain mods and certain armor pieces, you can definitely just skip ahead to the part that is appropriate to you. Okay, so this build is not something I personally came up with, and I came across it because I played with a random Devastator. For privacy's sake, I won't disclose his name, but he was cool enough to actually let me share this through this video. Anyways, this mysterious Devastator was playing weird from the get-go. He was using the Marshall set, and from what I can tell, he was running around with his pistol. Yeah, his pistol. To make things even weirder, I noticed he was using Gravity Leap and Earthquake at the same time. Those skills are great, I feel, when anchoring their own respective builds, but I found it weird that he was using both at the same time. Then I finally saw this.
Look at that.
Yeah, he messed up an entire group of enemies in one go, and I was kind of shocked and taken aback. So shocked that I creeped his damage in the end and found that he was using something called Moaning Winds, which just sounds dirty because honestly I'm 12 years old. Anyways, a quick research on Moaning Winds, and I have found that this build has been doing some insane DPS, and so I decided to give this build a try. To my pleasant surprise, you can bang out an insane amount of damage. Literally, this build becomes a melt a boss's build for the Devastator. The highest I personally saw the damage was just below 2 million, which was super nutty. Alas, here we are breaking down what you need in order for your Devastator to be just as insane. In this build, we are using the bottom tree. Duh, cause, bleed. There are 3 ways to make high DPS possible. One way is to focus on endless mass with a mod called high intensity. The second is to utilize Gravity Leap focused with the Despair mod. And lastly, if you are lucky enough to have all these pieces, you can combine these 2 builds to make an ultimate build. All 3 rely on the Moaning Winds, which inflicts an insane amount of damage to enemies in an 8-meter radius after reloading. The reason we are able to reach such high DPS numbers is because of how we manipulate the damage to enemies that are afflicted with bleed. This is where having 3 of the Seismic Commander armor pieces comes into play. When you have any of 3 pieces on, you activate the set bonus, which increases your damage to enemies that are afflicted with bleed by 50%. For now, let's discuss some of the must-haves. The 3 builds I'm going to share with you are not cheap, nor is it an early build for you fledgling earthbenders, because right off the bat you're going to need at least 3 pieces of the Seismic Commander set. That is right, we need 3 so we can take full advantage of the set bonus. We will talk about all the specifics later in the setup portion of the video. Next, you need at least 1 of these 2 pieces from the Marshall set. You either need the torso, which gives you high intensity, and the boots, which gives you despair. And as I mentioned earlier, they work in a very similar fashion. Lastly, we need the Moaning Winds mod. There is no 2 ways about this. This is probably the most important mod you need for this build, otherwise it will not be as effective. This mod can be found in the legendary shotgun Anemone. No, that seems really wrong. Anemoy. Ha, honestly, I bet you can't say it. Let's hear you try. You know what? Joke's on you because I cannot hear you. Okay, so that is it for the must-haves. Most of the other mods are interchangeable, but like I said, this build is not cheap. Now for the setup. As I mentioned, we need to have 3 pieces of the Seismic Commander set on your character to activate the set bonus. For reference, my dude has on the Seismic Commander legs, hands, and boots. So great, check. Because this build technically branches into 3 separate builds, we're going to have to break them down individually. If you have all the mods that I mentioned earlier, use the timestamps to the portion of the video where I combine these 2 first builds to make an ultimate carnage build. Just use the timestamps. For now, we are going to talk about the Endless Mass build. Here our focus is bunching up the enemies. This becomes a walk in the park because in the first build we focus on number 1, Endless Mass with high intensity, and number 2, Moaning Winds. And along with the legendary set bonus, we are ready to tear shit up. So you want to gather a bunch of enemies with Endless Mass and then reload to activate Moaning Winds. Glorious death. But wait, there's actually more. To squeeze out more DPS, we're going to focus on the bleed status effect. If you guys remember, we already have a 50% damage increase to enemies inflicted with bleed. However, we can add more to that fire. For that, I recommend a legendary mod called Tainted Blood. This mod increases damage to enemies inflicted with bleed by 25%. So now we are at a total of 75% damage increase. The icing on top is bleed them all, because the most effective way to cause bleed is to utilize the same skill that bunches everyone up. This causes all enemies caught in Endless Mass to be inflicted with bleed. So now everyone is bleeding and exploding. And if you got the mod Wide Horizons, just put it on. This mod increases the radius of Endless Mass by 25%. So more power, baby. You get to cause bleed to a ton of enemies and watch them pop. To further enhance this build, if you got the power assimilation mod, put that shit on. This mod increases your anomaly power by 11k when fully maxed out for every elite on the field. So again, more power, baby. If you don't got that, see if you have something called Bloody Boost, a tier 2 mod. This guy adds 15% more damage to enemies inflicted with bleed. So add that up to the total and we're looking at around 90% damage total to enemies inflicted with bleed. All in all, you are now the harbinger of death. Does that even make sense? I don't know, but you guys get what I mean. Now for the Gravity Leap / Despair build. This is for those who got the Marshal's boots, but not the Marshal's chest piece. Because of my setup, I actually dismantled the Marshall boots so I could add the Despair mod to my catalog. Then I slotted it wherever I could fit it. In my case, the hands got the tier 3 mod, so check. Of course, we already have Moaning Winds, so there you have it. You now have all the must-haves for this build. 3 Seismic Commander armor pieces, Despair, and Moaning Winds. This is a little harder to set up when compared to the Endless Mass build because of the fact that we do not have a way to bunch up the enemies, but it still works, especially when the enemies charge in at you like they do most of the time anyways. Another reason this build is slightly more difficult is the bleed status effect. Of course, you can equip Bloody Crush to your Gravity Leap and that can inflict bleed, but Gravity Leap's radius is small overall that it's better to just use Earthquake with Bloody Shock to inflict bleed on a larger group of enemies. So with that said, you can use Grav Leap first, then use Earthquake, or in my opinion, the better option is to use Earthquake, then Grav Leap second to give yourself more time with the Despair mod. Let's not forget that this mod is only active for 5 seconds. So you have that tiny window to make sure you hit everything correctly and then reload. After doing this, you have all the boxes checked. Most of the enemies in the area have bleed and you have inflicted despair on them. And the only thing left for you to do is reload your weapon and watch them pop. Of course, having double jump just extends despair's duration, or technically you can stack it for more damage. You can also utilize the other mods I mentioned for the Endless Mass build, and that is Bloody Boost for 15% more damage to enemies inflicted with bleed, or Power Assimilation, which increases anomaly power by 11,000 per elite in the area. Overall, I think that this build is a little bit more technical and requires more gamer sense to pull off with a good flow, but I guarantee you that this is manageable. That being said, what happens if you got both the high intensity mod and the despair mod? This is full on carnage. You just mop the floor with your enemy's blood. That is it. Game, set, match. When you have all the pieces in this build, you can go whichever direction you choose. In my case, I stuck with Earthquake, Endless Mass, and Gravity Leap. With that in mind, time to explain my mod selection choices. To enhance Endless Mass, I stuck with Wide Horizons, High Intensity, and Bleed 'em all. That way I can gather a shit ton of enemies and inflict bleed on all these enemies. And of course, because we have High Intensity, we can do some heavy damage once we reload near any of them pretty much. 8 meters is a pretty big radius for Moaning Winds. For a gravity leap, I equipped double jump and despair. The reason why I included double jump is when Endless Mass is on cooldown, I technically have a window or an opportunity, I guess, to utilize the despair mod instead of waiting to utilize Endless Mass again. That way I can pretty much dish out around the same amount of damage 2 separate times, and I don't have to wait for one skill to cool down before I can actually reload and dish a crazy amount of damage. For Earthquake, I left Asunder on the hands and used Extra Quake. Earthquake, funny enough, became my healing skill because of the decreased cooldown because we are in the bottom tree. My extra slots included the following. We have Power Assimilation, Tainted with Blood, and Damage Absorber. Essentially, the playstyle is very similar to the Endless Mass build. We gather a large group of enemies and then reload. But because we have Grav Leap with Despair, we can stack the damage. And like I mentioned earlier, if you are waiting for the cooldown for Endless Mass, for example, you have the choice of actually using Gravity Leap twice. That way they are inflicted with a similar debuff, and then all you got to do is reload and take advantage of that Moaning Winds, and then you'll potentially deal the same amount of damage. So depending on your playstyle or your play choices, the way I personally do it is I would use Endless Mass, run up to that group of enemy, and then reload. Everyone is already inflicted with that bleed, everyone's already gathered up in bunch, and everyone already has the high intensity debuff. So once that is cooling down, I would find a next group of enemies, utilize Gravity Leap, and then do it twice. That way they have the debuff stacked on them, and then I would reload my secondary or my pistols and then get the damage output once again. It's just a way for you to do the damage twice. Although I've never personally tested using Endless Mass, double Gravity Leap, I just feel that you're gonna run out of time before anything else happens. But let me know if you guys give that a try. But that's pretty much the build. Some quick things to point out: if you are playing co-op and the connection is kind of poopy, this build gets a little hard to do, because I kind of notice, especially if the connection is not too good, you kind of just stand still after you finish Gravity Leap, kind of wasting a second. So it's harder for you to stack double jump with the Despair mod. That's just one kind of thing I've noticed, is that if you're utilizing the Gravity Leap build, it gets a little wonky when you are playing crossplay mostly. But if you're playing with guys that aren't crossplay and you're just sticking to the same system, it seems to be okay. You just don't want to mistime these things, because it would suck if you Gravity Leaped and then tried to reload and then you didn't do that amount of damage. You just kind of be in a group of enemies and then kind of get one-shotted. So watch out for that. But yeah, that is it for me in this build video, guys. If there are suggestions you guys have, leave it in the comment section below so I can give it a try. Hopefully this helps out my fellow Devastators reach some nice DPS numbers. Guys, thanks for watching. Click that thumbs up and consider subscribing. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.